This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
We're working to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Welcome to ASEAN.
Hi, Alma, and to all our viewers. Yes, I'm Crystal Mapa from ABC Thailand Bureau, bringing you the news in the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines, a man died after suffering from severe head injury when hit by an uprooted coconut tree at the height of Typhoon Bising, international named Surigay, as it continues to blow fierce winds and dump heavy rains in eastern Visayas, displacing thousands of people.
Myanmar's shadow government urged Southeast Asian leaders to give it a seat at the table during crisis talks next week and not to recognize the military regime that seized power in a February coup.
The U.S. Treasury rolled back a Trump-era accusation that Switzerland and Vietnam were manipulating their exchange rates to gain a competitive trade advantage, saying there was insufficient evidence for that charge.
And Philippine authorities said Saturday they have seized some 200 tons of illegally harvested giant clam shells worth nearly $25 million in one of the biggest known operations of its kind in the country.
First, to the extreme weather situation here in the country, Pagasa said Typhoon Bising, with international name Surigay, will continue to dampen Bicol region and parts of the Visayas today. Pagasa also said moderate to heavy with at times intense rains will be experienced over Bicol region, northern Samar, eastern Samar, Biliran, and Leyte. Bising maintained its strength, packing a maximum sustained winds of 195 kilometers per hour near the center and gustiness of up to 240 kilometers per hour. It was last seen at 250 kilometers east-northeast of Virac, Catanduanes, moving north-northwestward at 10 kilometers per hour. Now, in the next 24 hours, Pagasa said the northeasterly wind flow enhanced by Bising will also bring strong breeze to near gale conditions with higher gusts over most of northern Luzon, Aurora, and the rest of Quezon that are not under any tropical cyclone signals. Very rough to very high seas will be experienced over the eastern seaboard of Luzon and rough to very high seas over the northern and eastern seaboards of eastern Visayas. Sea travel is risky for all types of seacraft. Rough to very rough seas over the northern and western seaboards of northern Luzon and the eastern seaboard of Caraga, and rough seas over the remaining seaboards of localities where tropical cyclone signals are in effect. And the eastern seaboard of Davao Oriental, sea travel is risky for small seacraft, and mariners without the proper experience should immediately seek safe harbor, according to Pagasa. Now, moderate to rough seas over the western seaboard of central Luzon. Mariners of small seacraft are also advised not to venture out over these waters. Inexperienced mariners of these vessels should avoid navigating in these conditions.
In a related news, 8 areas remain under signal number 2 as Typhoon Bising maintains its strength and moves north-northwestward on Monday, April 19. In its 11 a.m. bulletin, the Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Services Administration said the following areas in Luzon and Visayas are under the tropical cyclone wind signal, with the Eye of Bising located 235 kilometers east-northeast of Verac, Catanduanes, or 360 kilometers east of Daet, Camarines Norte. Here's more.
Meters per hour. Signal, dito nga po, signal number 2, dito po sa Catanduanes. Particular po dito rin sa Eastern Samar, sa Samar, Northern Samar at sa Biliran. Nakataas pa rin ang ating signal number 2 dito sa eastern portion po ng Camarines Sur, particular po yan sa bayan ng Garchitorena, Presentacion, Caramoan, Sagnay, San Jose at Lagonoy. Nakataas pa rin ating signal number 2 dito sa eastern portion ng Albay, yan po ay sa bayan ng Tiwi, Malinaw, Tabaco, Malilipot, Santo Domingo, Bacacay, Vaporapu, Legazpi City at Manito. At nakatas pa rin ang ating signal number 2 dito naman sa eastern and central portion po ng Sorsogon. Yan po ay sa bayan naman ng Castilla, Sorsogon City, Preto Diaz, Gubat, Barcelona, Kasiguran, Huban, Magallanes, Bulan, Bulusan, Irosin, Santa Magdalena at Matnog. So, at sa nasabi pong mga lugar ay patuloy na makakaranas po ng masungit na panahon na may maalon hanggang sa napakaalong karagatan. At ang atin naman pong signal number 1, nakataas po yan, dito po sa eastern portion ng Isabela. Particular po yan sa bayan ng Dibilacan, Palanan at Dinapigi. Ang signal number 1 nakataas pa rin sa northern portion ng Aurora, particular sa bayan ng Kasiguran at Dilasag. At sa southern portion po ng Quezon, sa bayan naman ng Ginyangan, Calawag at Tagkawayan, kasama po ang Pulilio Island. Sa Camarines Norte at sa nalaming bahagi ng Camarines Sur, sa nalaming bahagi ng Albay, at gayon na rin po sa nalaming bahagi ng Sorsogon at Masbate, kasama po ang Ticao Island at Borias Island. At nakataas pa rin ang ating signal number 1 dito po sa probinsya ng Leyte, Southern Leyte at gayon na rin sa northern portion po ng Cebu, particular po sa bayan ng Tabongon, Borbon, San Remigio, Bogo City, Medellin at Daang Bantayan, kasama na rin ang Bantayan at Camotes Island. At gayon na rin po, nakataas pa rin ang ating signal number 1 sa Mindanao naman, sa bahagi po ng Dinagat Island, Siargao Island at Bukas Grande Island. Ang nasabing mga lugar patuloy pa rin makakaranas po ng mga pag-ulan na may mga pagbugso naman ng hangin.
In a related news, a man died after suffering from severe head injury when hit by an uprooted coconut tree at the height of Typhoon Bising with international name Surigay. As it continues to blow fierce winds and dump heavy rains in eastern Visayas, it has already displaced thousands of residents. The Office of Civil Defense Regional Office identified the fatality as Alberto Wales, 79 years old, of San Isidro Village Street, Bernard, Southern Leyte. He was declared dead on arrival at the Anahawan District Hospital at around 5:30 in the afternoon on Sunday. Meantime, in San Jose, Northern Samar, Louis Din, 40, went missing on April 16 when he and 3 other companions ventured into the sea to pick livestock from a nearby islet. His companions returned to their families on Sunday. Rough seas have stranded at least 1,196 passengers, 521 vehicles and 17 sea vessels in different ports of northern Samar, Samar Leyte, and southern Leyte provinces. All inbound and outbound flights at the Tacloban Airport have been canceled since Saturday, and at least 13,692 individuals have been evacuated to safer grounds in Samar, northern Samar, eastern Samar, and Leyte provinces. Heavy flooding has been reported in 42 villages in northern Samar, 24 villages in eastern Samar. As of Monday morning, the center of the Eye of Bising was located at 250 kilometers east-northeast of Virac, Catanduanes.
Meanwhile, disaster authorities in Vietnam has asked all localities to make the necessary preparations for Super Typhoon Surigay as it is lurking near the East Vietnam Sea. Surigay was 420 kilometers east of the central Philippines as of 7 a.m. on Sunday, packing winds at 200 to 220 kilometers per hour, according to the National Center for Hydrometeorological Forecasting. In the next 24 hours, the super typhoon is forecast to travel northwest at 5 to 10 kilometers per hour. By 7 a.m. on Monday, Surigay will have been 300 kilometers east of the central Philippines. By 7 a.m. on Tuesday, it will have been 300 kilometers southeast of Luzon Island, with wind speed slightly decreasing to between 185 and 200 kilometers per hour. Disaster officials asked authorities in the coastal localities to ensure the safety of local residents and production activities. They also said that rescue units and vehicles must be ready to promptly deal with any situation.
In other news, Myanmar's shadow government urged Southeast Asian leaders to give it a seat at the table during crisis talks next week and not to recognize the military regime that seized power in a February 1 coup. Mo Zhao-u, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Parallel National Unity Government, formed Friday by ousted lawmakers, mostly from Suu Kyi's party, as well as ethnic minority politicians, said ASEAN had not reached out to them. If ASEAN, he said, wants to help solve the Myanmar situation, they are not going to achieve anything without consulting and negotiating with the NUG, which is supported by the people and has full diplomacy, he told Voice of America's Burmese service. It's important, he said, that this military council is not recognized. This needs to be handled carefully, unquote. Junta leader Min Aung Hlaing is expected to join the special ASEAN summit on Myanmar on Saturday in Jakarta, his first official overseas trip since the putsch that ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi. The army has moved to quell mass protests against its rule, killing at least 730 people now, according to a local monitoring group. The General Min Aung Hlaing's invitation to the meeting of the 10-country Association of Southeast Asian Nations has drawn scorn from activists who have urged foreign leaders not to formally recognize the junta.
The junta is planning to release more than 23,000 prisoners nationwide, an official said Saturday, even as the military continues to detain and issue arrest warrants for anti-coup dissidents. That's the Senate. Myanmar typically grants an annual amnesty to thousands of prisoners to mark its traditional Buddhist New Year holiday, which in previous years have been joyous affairs with citywide water fights. But this year, with the military back in power after ousting civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi, anti-coup activists have used the holiday as an opportunity to protest the growing death toll and mass arrests. In February, the junta released a similar number of prisoners, with some rights groups at the time fearing the move was to free up space for opponents of the military as well as cause chaos in communities. On Wednesday, a rebel group executed a man who had been freed in that amnesty, who it said had subsequently raped and killed a 5-year-old girl. Just before Armed Forces Day, the regime also freed around 900 jailed demonstrators. But since the February 1 coup, more than 3,100 people, the bulk of them anti-coup protesters and activists, have been detained, according to local monitoring group as Assistance Association for Political Prisoners. The junta has issued 90 arrest warrants on state-run media, targeting celebrities, influencers, journalists, and prominent activists with large social media followings. By Friday night, they totaled 380. Some 80 doctors have also been named as wanted fugitives for attempting to deteriorate peace and stability. Myanmar's healthcare workers have been at the forefront of a nationwide civil disobedience movement, refusing to return to work under a military regime. Their absence has left many of the country's hospitals unstaffed during the pandemic.
Meanwhile, the junta continued targeting the media on Sunday, arresting Japanese freelance reporter Yuki Kitazumi. He was arrested at his home in Yangon on Sunday evening, according to his assistant in a message. In February, he was beaten up and briefly detained during a crackdown on protesters, but was later released. The number of reporters arrested so far has totaled more than 65, and at least 34 remain in custody, according to monitoring group reporting ASEAN. Now, authorities announced Sunday night on state-run television 20 more celebrities and 20 more doctors would be added to their arrest warrant list of 420 prominent people. Earlier, unrest continued across the country on Sunday with protesters rallying in Mandalay, Miktila, Magway, and Ningyan, showing support for the national unity government. At Palau, meanwhile, in the country's south, demonstrators brandished banners that read military dictators should not be allowed to rule. The dictatorship will be uprooted, support the national unity government. Young demonstrators also staged motorbike rallies while carrying flags in Pakant and Sagaing. ASEAN in Focus. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Totoo ang kasabihang may pera sa basura, lalo na kung magagawa ang iba't ibang bagay mula sa mga recyclable material na inaakala ng iba. May ilang barangay sa bansa ang nagre-recycle ng basura at makikita ang iba't ibang bagay na gawa sa basura. Dekorasyon sa bahay. Sa mga proyektong ito, nagiging malinis ang kapaligiran bukod sa mayroon pang pagkakakitaan.
Welcome back to the program. Thai school opening may be deferred to June. And here's Gretchen Kasadsad, our Eagle News Thailand Bureau. Hi, Gretchen.
Yes, Crystal, hello, good afternoon. Yes, according to Bangkok Post, the new school term next month may be postponed to June due to the worsening COVID-19 situation. As stated by the Education Minister, the current pandemic situation and its impact on schools and students would continue to be assessed until April 30 to see whether it is possible to start the new school term in May as planned. But if it is found to be impossible, the new term may be moved to June 1. The minister said the likely delay would only be imposed to once several factors had been taken into account, including contingency plans with each educational authority has put in place to cope with difficulties in arranging in-person classes during the outbreak. Though the minister said every school is not expected to have to fully move classes online, as there are certain schools now appear ready to ensure strict COVID-19 control measures if and when they are allowed to reopen, which means they shouldn't have to fully shift to online learning. But those schools that cannot guarantee adequate social distancing at school will, however, probably have to connect or conduct rather classes online. That is the latest report here in Bangkok, Thailand. Back to you, Crystal.
Thank you so much for your update, Gretchen. Stay safe and healthy as always.
Yes, reporting from Bangkok, Thailand, this is Gretchen Kusai said, we live in interesting times.
In Cambodia now, where the government has outlined a mechanism and procedures for providing social assistance to poor families in Phnom Penh and Tak Mau town that are being placed under lockdown, and households across the country whose member either died from COVID-19 or tested positive. The assistance mechanism only applies to those who have been severely affected and whose cases are linked to the February 20 community outbreak. They are eligible if they hold equity card or if their household member works in a high-risk profession. Workers in the informal economy, ordinary vendors, and those identified by the local authority as being poor and affected by the disease. Each family that is covered by the scheme will receive a single financial assistance of 160,000 real, around $40, if one member is affected. If 2 or 3 household members are affected, then the family will receive 200,000 real. And if a family has at least 4 members, 240,000 real will be provided. Each family will also receive one op food and consisting of 25 kilograms of rice, a case of instant noodles, 6 bottles of fish sauce, and 6 bottles of soy sauce. However, this scheme does not cover the family holding equity card and that has already received government assistance through its cash transfer program for the poor families according to the decision.
The risk of resurgence of COVID-19 outbreaks in Vietnam remains high due to illegal immigration, particularly along the country's southwestern borderline. That, according to the government's latest resolution. From that perspective, the government has urged ministries now and the agencies and localities to seriously implement preventive measures under the motto of proactive prevention, early detection, prompt quarantine, effective treatment, stamping out outbreaks, and quick stabilization of the situation. The subordinate levels must stand ready to deal with all situations, the government said, while mask wearing is compulsory for all individuals in public places. The government also ordered sustaining strict control of entry and exit, especially in border provinces. In response to the government's order, the Minister of Health, Nguyen Chan Long, on Saturday decided to establish 5 different delegations led by him and his deputies to 13 localities in the Mekong Delta to inspect entry and exit, quarantine and medical surveillance, and vaccination works. The Minister of Health, chairpersons of provinces, and the centrally run cities shall also take prime responsibility for prevention and control in their localities.
Hundreds waited in grim silence at a Bangkok stadium to get free COVID-19 tests Saturday as a spiraling infection rate gripped Thailand on a 4th consecutive day of more than 1,000 new cases. The capital appears to be the epicenter of the kingdom's 3rd wave after infections were traced back to a nightlife district earlier this month. Let's listen in.
So this outbreak had actually affected all provinces, all localities, all regions in Thailand, rather. In the past, we had been counting that 15, 11, 9, 7 provinces had been COVID-free. Now, because of the travel of people that are positive from COVID from various clusters, for example, in Bangkok, traveling back to the provinces. This has caused the situation to be that all 77 provinces of Thailand have now reported cases.
Tawisin Visanayotin, a spokesman for Thailand's COVID-19 task force, meanwhile said that nearly 12,000 patients were still receiving treatment in hospitals, including temporary field sites, and nearly 10,000 new cases were found last week. Authorities have instated interprovincial travel restrictions right before Songkran New Year festivities last week, usually a period when Thais vacation or return to their hometown. The typically rowdy holiday is also marked by water fights on the streets, but Bangkok was quiet this week, with bars, restaurants, and night markets closed early. New restrictions will bite from Sunday, including an alcohol ban in restaurants and bars, while entertainment venues will be shuttered across the country for 2 weeks. Political opponents of Premier Prayut Chan-o-cha have criticized his administration's handling the virus and the slow rollout of the vaccine, which has been plagued by delays. By Saturday, 605,000 doses of both Sinovac and AstraZeneca vaccines had been administered.
In other news, the period of stay and employment of overseas Filipino workers in Korea who are under the Employment Permit System or EPS and whose contract term expires within the period until April 13 to December 31 of this year will be extended for another year, effective April 13. In a report to Labor Secretary Silvestro Bello III, Labor Attaché Maya Valderrama of the Philippine Overseas Labor Office in Korea cited the recent issuance from Korea's Ministry of Employment and Labor, or MOEL, and the Ministry of Justice, or MOJ, on the relevant amendment to the Act on Employment of Foreign Workers, which extends the stay of foreign workers given the prevailing condition brought about. Once provides that the stay and employment period of foreign workers under the EPS and whose employment period 3 years or 4 years and 10 months expires from April 13 to December 31 this year, and it's extended now for 1 year. Valderrama said the MOEL expects that this measure will resolve the difficulties of workers entering and leaving the country during the pandemic and the manpower shortage of small and medium-sized companies. Bello thanked the Seoul government for the move that will benefit hundreds of workers in Korea.
A total of 13 people, including 7 children, died when the sports utility vehicle they were riding in fell into an irrigation canal in Tabuk City, Kalinga, Sunday evening. Colonel David Limong, Provincial Director of Kalinga Provincial Police Office, said the vehicle got submerged in water. Limong said based on initial information, the group were on the way home from a trip to Bulol Lake, a known tourist destination in the city, when the accident happened at around 6:15 p.m. Reports said 11 of the passengers were taken to Mejia Kim Medical Center in Barangay Agbanawag, but were declared dead on arrival. The 2 other victims taken to the Kalinga Provincial Hospital in Barangay Bulanao were also declared dead on arrival. Limong said investigation is ongoing. The news continues here in ASEAN in Focus after this short break.
Welcome back. The U.S. Treasury rolled back a Trump-era accusation that Switzerland and Vietnam were manipulating their exchange rates to gain a competitive trade advantage, saying on Friday there was insufficient evidence for this charge. While Treasury withdrew the manipulator label, the two countries continue to meet the criteria for scrutiny of their currency policies and were joined by Taiwan, according to the semi-annual report to Congress. China also remains on Treasury's monitoring list. After being removed, Donald Trump signed an initial trade pact with Beijing. Beijing has also been a target of scrutiny under the report, and Washington has frequently accused the government of keeping the exchange rate artificially low, using its massive stockpile of U.S. dollars. The watch list also includes Japan, Korea, Germany, Italy, India, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, as well as Ireland and Mexico, which were added to the December list. Now, Congress requires the twice-yearly analysis to single out countries that might be actively trying to keep their currencies weaker against the U.S. dollar, which would make their exports cheaper while making American goods more expensive. The Swiss National Bank, or SNB, protested the December designation as a manipulator and in a statement Friday again denied any inappropriate activity. The Swiss franc has long been considered a safe haven currency, meaning investors scurry to buy it in times of crisis, pushing up its value and causing the SNB to intervene.
Bank of Thailand Assistant Governor Chantavarn Sucharit said that it has tapped into the market only to curb volatility in the baht, and Thailand has never used the exchange rate as a tool to gain an unfair trade advantage. She also said the central bank is committed to exchange rate flexibility, with interventions limited only to curbing excessive volatility and rapid movements of the baht on both sides. She said Thailand remains on the U.S. currency manipulation list that require monitoring, but no impact on business flows and activities between the engaging in bilateral trade and investment with the U.S. The BOT statement said, more importantly, the assessment does not impede the ability of the BOT to fulfill its mandate on implementing macroeconomic policies to safeguard domestic stability, and it would closely monitor developments of trade and current account balance. Thailand is one of 11 countries that remain on a watch list, meaning they met 2 of 3 criteria for currency manipulation that could put the U.S. at a trade disadvantage.
In other news, a Singaporean activist has raised $108,000 he owes Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong in defamation damages. The second time this month, a government critic turned to the public to fund payments to the premier. Critics have accused the government of seeking to silence dissent in the tightly regulated city-state through costly libel suits. But activists are fighting back by appealing to the public for donations through social media. Roy Ngering, a former government employee, was found guilty in 2014 of defaming Lee after accusing him in a blog of misappropriating state pension funds. He was ordered to pay Lee 150,000 Singaporean dollars or 112,000 US dollars in damages, which he has been paying in installments. Ngering, who now lives in Taiwan, made online appeals for donations to cover the 144,000 Singaporean dollars that he still owes the Prime Minister after another blogger successfully raised a similar amount earlier this month. Ngering announced Friday that he met his goal over 9 days of crowdfunding, with more than 2,000 people donating. After 7 long years, he said, "You have come together to help me cross this hurdle and move on to a next chapter of my life," he wrote in a post on Facebook. "I cannot thank you enough." he added. Nyaring previously raised more than 112,000 Singaporean dollars through crowdfunding but spent the money on legal costs during his defense. Another blogger, Leong Ziyan, was ordered to pay 133,000 Singaporean dollars in damages after being found guilty of defaming the Prime Minister by sharing an article on Facebook which linked the Singaporean leader to the money laundering scandal at State Fund 1MDB in Malaysia. Leong successfully raised the amount in an online crowdfunding campaign earlier this month. But he said Thursday he must pay an additional amount of almost 130,000 Singaporean dollars in legal costs. Singapore has consistently ranked highly in surveys as one of the world's least corrupt countries, but rights groups say its leaders have used financially ruinous defamation suits to silence critics and political opponents. Singaporean leaders maintain that the lawsuits are necessary to protect their reputations from unfounded allegations.
Cambodia exported $99.07 million worth of merchandise to South Korea in the first quarter of 2021, marking a marginal increase of more than 5% from $93.85 million in January-March of last year, despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, according to data from the Korea International Trade Association. Hong Vanak, Director of International Economics at the Royal Academy of Cambodia, told the Post on April 18 that the value of exports surged in part due to the efforts of the two governments to establish a bilateral free trade agreement. Cambodia and South Korea concluded negotiations on a bilateral FTA in early February and are scheduled to sign the deal in June. Cambodia Chamber of Commerce Vice President Lim Heng echoed Vanak's comment that the increased value of exports showcases the improved performance of the manufacturing industry, saying that the kingdom is cranking out more products that meet buyers' quality requirements. However, Heng said export growth could cool in the second quarter as factories in the capital and Kandal are forced to suspend their operations in light of the lockdowns and mounting reported COVID-19 infections. Two Indonesian hackers have been arrested over an international scam in which $60 million was stolen from a COVID-19 aid program helping Americans left jobless by the pandemic, authorities said. Text messages were sent to 20 million Americans, directing them to more than a dozen fake U.S. government websites, police in the Southeast Asian nation said late Thursday. Thousands of victims supplied personal information, including social security numbers, to the fake sites in the hopes of securing $2,000 offered under a real assistance program for the unemployed, authorities said. But their data was instead used by scammers to steal millions of dollars from the program. East Java Police Chief Nico Afinta said some 30,000 U.S. citizens were scammed and the government's financial loss is up to $60 million. The two suspects were arrested last month in Indonesia's second biggest city, Surabaya, after police were notified by U.S. authorities. Indonesian police did not say how long the scam had been running. The pair could face up to 9 years in prison under Indonesia's electronic information law. Police said they were investigating the possible involvement of a third person who may have secured funds illicitly.
Meanwhile, Asian markets rose today after recovery hopes for the coronavirus battered U.S. economy, fueling another round of record highs on Wall Street to close last week's trade. Both the Dow and the S&P finished at new peaks on Friday and also posted their fourth consecutive weekly gains, following on the heels of strong data for American housing starts, employments, and retail sales. Investors are banking on accelerated U.S. pandemic containment efforts, marking a step forward or step toward economic normalcy, with half of all adults in the country now having had at least one vaccine dose. The easing of restrictions in Europe has also boosted optimism, even as analysts keep a wary eye on alarming outbreaks prompted by new strains of the virus elsewhere in the world. Hong Kong and Shanghai were both up more than 1% in morning trade, despite first quarter economic growth in China scaling another market expectations. Tokyo rose 0.2% after a shaky start with investors searching for new purchase cues. Sydney, Seoul, Taipei all rose, while Singapore was flat, and slumps rounded out morning trade in Jakarta and Manila. In other news now, Philippine authorities said Saturday they have seized some 200 tons of illegally harvested giant clam shells, worth nearly $25 million in one of the biggest known operations of its kind in the country. Conservationists have expressed alarm over the surging illicit trade in the endangered creatures, which are used as a substitute for ivory following a global crackdown in the trade of elephant tusks. The Philippines is home to most of the world's giant tropical clam species, and Friday's raid took place in the western province of Palawan, considered a poaching hotbed. The Coast Guard said 4 suspects were arrested on the remote Green Island in the Sulu Sea that turned up the largest ever giant clamshell haul by law enforcers in the area. Jovic Fabelio, spokesman for the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development, told AFP, quote, "Taking the giant clams from their natural habitat is a form of intergenerational crime because it will permanently affect the marine ecosystem and future generations will be deprived of the benefits accruing from it." He said the seized shells included those of the Tridacna gigas, the world's largest clam, growing up to 1.3 meters or 4.5 feet wide and weighing up to 250 kilograms or 550 pounds. These host marine algae, which are a basic food source for many of the fish species consumed by humans. Conservationists say giant clam shells are used as an alternative material for products ranging from earrings to chandeliers as ivory becomes scarce. And the first Indonesian MotoGP has been pushed back 1 year and will not take place before March of 2022. The championship promoters, Dorna, announced this on Friday. MotoGP signed a 3-year deal to host a race in Indonesia in 2019, with the inaugural event at the purpose-built street track on the island of Lombok, which is still currently under construction, initially due to be held this year. Now, due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, all parties involved agreed to hold the first MotoGP World Championship Grand Prix at the track in the first part of 2022 season, in principle during March, according to Dorna in a press statement. MotoGP organizers visited the site on Wednesday to check progress on the circuit. The new track, the layout of which will be used in part by the inhabitants of the island when there are no organized events, could yet host a test event at the end of the year if MotoGP is able to hold events in Southeast Asia towards the end of 2021. The owners of the circuit are hoping to hold the Superbike World Championship event on November 14 at this tourist resort, made up of beaches and other large hotels, which was badly shaken by an earthquake back in 2018. Indonesia is hoping to follow the path taken by Malaysia and Thailand, which arrived on the MotoGP World Circuit in 2018, now in creating a strong home market in motorsports.
And finally, in our news, almost 500 Thai national athletes in 16 sports are now at a training camp preparing for the 10th ASEAN Para Games. Kongsak Yodmani, governor of the Sports Authority of Thailand, says the Sports Authority of Thailand and the Ministry of Tourism and Sports play a role in supporting Thai athletes and helps them to prepare for the Games, both physically and mentally. This includes working with sports associations to train the athletes, physical science services, healthcare, physical therapy, and psychologists. Jutinan Birumbakdi, chairman of the Paralympic Committee of Thailand, says the committee would like to use the ASEAN Para Games as a platform to promote new athletes who make up 30% of the total. He hopes Thai disabled athletes will gain experience in order to advance to a higher level of competition in the future, such as the Asian Para Games and Paralympics. As the country's representatives, the athletes promise to do their best. The 2020 ASEAN Para Games, officially known as the 10th ASEAN Para Games, is an biannual multi-sport event for athletes with physical disabilities. It will be held after the 2019 Southeast Asian Games in the Philippines from 18 to 25 of January.
Thank you for keeping me company, Crystal. As always, keep safe.
Likewise, Alma, and that's the latest news around the dynamic ASEAN region. Thank you for watching. Again, I am Crystal Mapo from ABC Thailand Bureau. We live in interesting times.
We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.